My name is Eleanor Hargrave. I'm 68 years old, and after I sacrificed my own dream trip to help my daughter, she and her husband showed up with a lemon tart and announced they were taking my house for their new baby. So I secretly sold it out from under them to a lovely young couple and disappeared without a word. It's been a journey, and I'm finally ready to tell it. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. Drop a comment with your city or country and what time it is there. It makes the world feel a little smaller, doesn't it? Okay, let's start at the beginning, which wasn't with the lemon tart, but a week earlier with the broken promise. The brochure felt like actual sunlight in my hands, its glossy pages warm from sitting on the kitchen table. For weeks, it had been my secret indulgence. Tucked inside were photographs so vibrant they seemed to hum with life. The Biltmore Estates rose garden in a riot of crimson and pink. The impossibly manicured greens of colonial Williamsburg, looking like a velvet carpet. And the wild, romantic tangles of Charleston's hidden courtyard gardens, draped in wisteria and mystery. For my 68th birthday, I had finally stopped dreaming and started doing. After a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs on the front burner, I had booked a trip for myself, a 10-day, fully guided tour of the most beautiful gardens on the East Coast. It was the first truly selfish act I had committed since Harold passed away 7 years ago, and it felt glorious. Everything was meticulously arranged, a fortress of planning against any last-minute chaos. My next-door neighbor, Florence, a retired school principal with an eagle eye, was going to collect my mail and keep a watch on the house. I had prepaid for a lawn service to come midweek. My suitcase, a sturdy old Samsonite that had been with me since my honeymoon, was already open on the guest bed. A few floral print blouses and comfortable walking shoes neatly arranged inside. My plane ticket, printed out and crisp, lay on the kitchen counter like a holy relic, nestled next to a list of rare plant nurseries I wanted to visit. This wasn't just a vacation. It was a pilgrimage. It was a declaration that my life was not a waiting room for old age, but a garden still capable of new blooms. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the one Harold had sanded smooth himself with his big, capable hands the summer after his second bypass, when the phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Tessa. A familiar, complicated knot tightened in my chest. A tangle of unconditional love and a faint, almost imperceptible dread. I adored my daughter, more than words could say, but our conversations had long ago fallen into a predictable transactional pattern. They were rarely just to say hello. "Hi, honey. Is everything okay?" I asked, my thumb tracing the edge of a picture of a magnificent peony garden, much like my own, only grander, more established. "Mom, thank God you answered," she said, her voice a carefully calibrated rush of panic. I knew that tone intimately. It was the overture to a request, the dramatic music that swelled just before the damsel tied herself to the train tracks. "Brenda, the boy sitter, she just called me like 2 minutes ago. Her mother fell and broke her hip in Sarasota. She has to fly to Florida tonight. Tonight, Mom! And Chad and I have this huge company dinner on Saturday. It's for his boss. The regional vice president is flying in from Chicago. It's absolutely critical for that promotion he's been working towards for the last year. We can't miss it. There is literally no one else I can haul." I closed my eyes, the vibrant colors of the brochure fading to black behind my eyelids. Saturday. My flight was scheduled for Friday morning. I could feel the glossy paper growing slick under my fingers as a faint sweat broke out on my palm. "Oh, Tessa, that's just terrible for Brenda's mother, but honey, my trip, my garden tour." I know, your garden thing. And I feel absolutely awful asking, truly. I wouldn't even dream of it if it wasn't a complete emergency. But this is just for the weekend. You could fly out on Monday, couldn't you? You'd only miss the first couple of days. Only the first couple of days. Only the Biltmore estate, the crown jewel of the entire tour, the very reason I had chosen these specific dates. Only the culmination of months of saving and dreaming. I could hear the unspoken assumption in her voice, the casual, ingrained belief that my plans were fluid, my dreams were deferrable, my time was less valuable than theirs. It was a story I knew by heart, a song I'd heard 1,000 times. The time I had given them the money from my emergency fund for the down payment for their first car, delaying the kitchen renovation Harold and I had planned for our anniversary. The countless weekends I'd rearranged my own small plans to watch the boys so they could have a date night or go to a concert. The antique sewing machine my own mother had left me, a beautiful singer with ornate gold leafing, the one I sold to a collector, to help them cover their moving costs when they found a bigger rental, with the promise they'd pay me back when they were settled. They never did. Tessa, I've been planning this for almost a year, I said, my voice softer than I wanted it to be, a whisper of protest against a hurricane of need. The tickets are non-refundable. You can get a credit, can't you? The airlines are so good about that now, she said quickly, her words a bulldozer clearing away my flimsy objectives. Please, Mom, it would mean the world to us. Chad's been under so much pressure at work, his salary is barely keeping up with inflation and the cost of everything. This promotion could change everything for us, for the boys. Think of their college fund. This is for their future. She had me, and she knew it. She had unsheathed the ultimate weapon, my grandsons. My love for Liam and Josh was the soft, vulnerable spot in my armor. Against their well-being, I had no defense. A familiar ache settled behind my ribs, the dull, heavy feeling of disappointment in myself. I looked at the plane ticket, a crisp, white rectangle of possibility. Then I pictured Tessa's stressed face, Chad's raw ambition, and the two smiling, innocent faces of my grandsons who deserve every chance in the world. All right, honey, I sighed, the sound of a white flag being raised in surrender. I'll do it. Let me call the airline. The relief in her voice was a physical thing, a sudden release of pressure that I could feel even through the phone line. Oh, Mom, you're a lifesaver. Seriously, the best. We owe you big time. I'll drop the boys off Friday morning. Love you.
She hung up before I could manage another word. I sat there in the oppressive quiet of my kitchen, the silence suddenly mocking my sacrifice. I picked up the plane ticket, walked slowly over to the small office nook where Harold had kept the paper shredder, and paused. For a moment, I considered just putting it in a drawer, a symbol of what could have been. But I knew I couldn't. I had to make it final. I fed the ticket into the machine's hungry slot. The motor whirred to life, a grinding mechanical sound that sliced my dream into 1,000 tiny, meaningless strips of paper. I told myself it was for family. It was the right thing to do. It was what a good mother, a good grandmother would do. But as I swept the confetti of my canceled trip into the trash can, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that I had just let them shred a small, vital piece of me along with it. Friday morning arrived not with the excited, nervous buzz of travel, but with the familiar, chaotic energy of two young boys. Liam, who was 8, burst into my house like a small, energetic hurricane, immediately demanding to know the Wi-Fi password as if it were a life-or-death matter. He was followed by 6-year-old Josh, who was quieter, but left a strategic trail of Legos in his wake, each one a potential landmine for an unsuspecting barefoot. Tessa gave me a fleeting, distracted hug that smelled of expensive hairspray and strong coffee. She thrust a duffel bag overflowing with clothes, iPads, and chargers into my hands. Their schedules are on the fridge. Pizza money's on the counter. Don't let them have too much screen time, but, do what you have to do, she rattled off, her words a practiced monologue, her eyes already scanning the street for her escape. We'll be back Sunday evening. You're a saint, Mom, a total rock star. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me in the whirlwind of their wake. The weekend passed in a blur of pancake breakfasts that left my kitchen dusted in a fine layer of flour, trips to the park where I pushed swings until my arms ached, and intense negotiations over the Nintendo Switch that required the diplomatic skills of a ambassador. I was exhausted, but I loved my grandsons with a fierceness that was primal. Seeing their joyful, messy faces covered in chocolate ice cream almost made the canceled trip worthwhile. Almost. On Saturday night, after I'd finally wrangled them into bed with a final story and a drink of water, I was tidying up the living room, a battlefield of discarded toys and snack wrappers. I went to grab my knitting bag from the entryway and realized I'd left it in my car that afternoon. I stepped out onto the front porch, into the cool, damp air of the May evening. The street was quiet, bathed in the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. As I walked towards my car in the driveway, I noticed that the light was on in Tessa's home office across the street. A flicker of confusion went through me. I had assumed they were out for their critically important company dinner, the event that had torpedoed my vacation. But Chad's large, dark SUV was in their driveway. Maybe the dinner had ended early. Or maybe a cold, unpleasant thought began to form in my mind. Acting on an impulse I didn't fully understand, I didn't turn back to my house. Instead, I took a few quiet steps across my lawn, the damp grass cool through my slippers, until I was standing in the deep shadow of the old oak tree that stood sentinel between our properties. Their window was cracked open, just enough for voices to drift out into the still night air. It was Tessa and Chad, and they weren't celebrating a successful business dinner. They were arguing. "I can't believe you maxed out the visa on that trip to Cabo, Chad. We're barely making the mortgage as it is, Tessa. The numbers don't lie." "It was a deal, a package deal," she hissed back, her voice sharp and defensive. "Don't you dare put this all on me. What about that ridiculous sound system you just had to have for your car, or the golf weekend with your buddies? We're a team, remember? We're supposed to be in this together." "A team that's sinking fast," he shot back. "That promotion isn't a sure thing. My boss is still talking about restructuring, bringing in someone from the outside. We need a permanent solution. We need to cut our biggest expense, and we need to do it now." There was a heavy pause. I held my breath, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "There's only one way," Tessa said, her voice dropping, becoming low and conspiratorial. The change in tone was terrifying. "We've talked about this a dozen times. It's the house. We move in with her." My blood ran cold. The chill of the night air seeped right into my bones, a deep internal freeze. This wasn't a new idea. This was a well-rehearsed plan. "And what, just kick her out?" Chad asked. There was no morality in his tone, only a detached concern for logistics. "She's not just going to hand over the keys, Tess. She loves that place." "She won't have a choice." Tessa's voice was suddenly hard as flint, stripped of the sweet, pleading tone she always used with me. It was the voice of a stranger. "We'll tell her it's for the baby." The baby? My mind raced, trying to catch up. Were they expecting another child? They hadn't said a single word to me. A grandchild is the one thing that might make me consider. What baby? Chad sounded as confused as I felt. "The idea of a baby, Chad, the one we'll start trying for as soon as we move in. It's the perfect, unassailable reason. Mom, we need more space for our growing family. The boys need a proper yard. We need to be here to take care of you in your old age. How can she possibly say no to that? It makes her look like a selfish, horrible old woman if she does." I felt like I was going to be physically sick. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The company dinner was a lie. My canceled trip, my sacrifice, was nothing more than a convenient opportunity for them to have a child-free weekend to finalize their hostile takeover. The house, my house, Harold's house, wasn't a home in their eyes. It was a financial solution, an asset to be liquidated, and I was just an obstacle to be managed with emotional manipulation and a phantom grandchild. "And the money from selling our place would completely clear our debts," Chad mused, his voice warming to the idea, the initial skepticism gone. "We could finally get ahead, remodel the kitchen, finish the basement, maybe even put in a pool." "Exactly," Tessa said with her voice full of smug triumph. "It's perfect. She's getting older. She'll be grateful for the help and the company soon enough. We'll just ease her into the idea, be gentle about it." Gentle. The word was a grotesque mockery. I backed away from the window, my body trembling uncontrollably. I stumbled back across the lawn and into my own dark, silent house, the one they were mentally renovating and carving up in their whispers. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against my ribs. All the small hurts, the quiet resentments, the ignored boundaries of the past 20 years suddenly coalesced into a single, blinding, ugly moment of clarity. This wasn't about need. It was about pure, unadulterated greed. They didn't see me as a mother or a grandmother. They saw me as a placeholder, a temporary guardian of their future inheritance. I looked around the living room, at the photos of Harold on the mantelpiece, at the worn armchair where he used to read the paper every evening. Every corner of this house held a memory, a piece of my life. I had painted these walls myself after he passed, a deep, calming blue. I had nurtured the peonies in the garden from stubborn, clay-caked roots into glorious, blushing blooms. After Harold's funeral, this house became my second skin, the place where I had painstakingly, tearfully rebuilt my life, piece by piece. And they were planning to take it, not with a fight, but with a smile and a lie about a baby. They thought I was a soft, sentimental old woman who could be easily manipulated and pushed aside. They thought my love for my family was a weakness they could exploit. That night, something inside me shifted irrevocably. The soft, yielding part of my heart that had always said yes began to harden. It cooled and solidified into something steely and resolute. They wanted to play a game? Fine. But they had made a critical, fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten that this was my house, and in my house, I was the one who made the rules. The following Wednesday, they executed their plan with a chilling precision that told me they had rehearsed this moment. They arrived around noon, just as I was folding a load of laundry. Tessa's expensive SUV, the one I'd helped them get a loan for, pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel with a sound of slow, deliberate finality. The doorbell rang, not the quick, familiar jab of a family member, but a long, formal press, a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. This time, I was ready. I took a deep, calming breath, smoothed the front of my apron, and walked to the door. I arranged my face into a mask of pleasant, maternal welcome. When I opened it, I was greeted by a full-scale theatrical performance. Tessa's smile was a masterpiece of loving concern, wide and bright, but not quite reaching her eyes. Her hug was too theatrical, a little too tight, as if she were trying to physically convey an affection she didn't feel. Chad hovered behind her, grinning like a game show host who was about to reveal the grand prize. In Tessa's hands was a white bakery box tied with a cheerful red string. "We brought dessert," she chirped, her voice a full octave higher than usual. "Lemon tart, your favorite." It wasn't my favorite. I preferred savory to sweet, a fact she had known since she was a little girl raiding my pantry for salty pretzels, not cookies. The tart was a prop, a sugary Trojan horse designed to signal a friendly, casual visit. I smiled back, a calm, placid smile I'd been practicing in the mirror for 3 days. "How lovely of you! Come on in." We sat at the dining table, the sacred space where Harold had held court, where countless family dinners had been shared, where birthdays had been celebrated and tears had been shed. Tessa placed the box in the center of the table with a flourish. The lemon tart was aggressively yellow, its meringue toppings sweating tiny beads of sugar, its crust already looking damp and crumbly as if it couldn't bear the weight of its own artificial sweetness. She sliced it with an enthusiasm that felt entirely rehearsed, chattering brightly about the boys and how much they'd enjoyed their weekend with me, how they couldn't stop talking about my pancakes. Chad chimed in, launching into a long, boring story about gas prices and a new smart TV he was thinking of buying. It was all noise, a verbal smokescreen designed to fill the air with a sense of normalcy before the real reason for their visit was revealed. I nodded and made the appropriate murmurs, playing my part as the slightly doting, slightly clueless mother. I let their words wash over me, but underneath my calm exterior, I was analyzing their strategy, their timing, their tells. I was a general, watching the enemy advance across the field. Then, as on cue, the small talk died down, a heavy, pregnant silence fell over the table.
Tessa leaned forward, folding her hands primly on the table. Her voice dropped half a step, shifting from casual to careful, a tone of practiced sincerity. This was it, the moment of the ambush. "So, Mom," she began, glancing at Chad for a flicker of support. His friendly grin had morphed into something firm, resolute, the look of a businessman about to close a deal. I took a small bite of the tart. It was cloyingly sweet, the lemon flavor tasting chemical and sharp. I met her gaze and held it, my expression of mild maternal interest. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing my fear or my anger. She continued, her eyes fixed on mine, searching for a reaction, and we've made a decision. A decision, not a proposal, not a discussion, a decision. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it was breathtaking. "We're going to be moving in with you next month," she said. The words were delivered not as a suggestion, but as a pronouncement, a royal decree from a queen to a subject. My fork rested against the edge of my plate. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. Inside, a cold, quiet rage was building into a towering inferno, but on the surface, I was a tranquil lake on a windless day. I let the silence stretch for a beat, then another, watching the confidence drain slightly from her face as she waited for the expected tears, the protests, the emotional scene she was so clearly prepared to manage. Instead, I gave them the one thing they were utterly unprepared for. I smiled. A genuine, warm, and completely disarming smile. "Perfect," I said, my voice light and airy, a tone that surprised even myself with its sincerity. "That's a wonderful idea. I'll start packing this weekend." The shock on their faces was a priceless work of art. Chad let out a whoosh of breath he'd clearly been holding, his shoulders slumping in relief. Tessa's eyes widened, a flicker of stunned disbelief followed by a tidal wave of triumphant relief. They had come armed for a battle, prepared for a messy, emotional siege they would have to endure. They had not, in their wildest dreams, expected immediate, cheerful capitulation. "Oh, Mom," Tessa breathed, her voice thick with false emotion, as she reached across the table to touch my hand. I let her fingers brush against mine, a brief, cool touch, but I didn't squeeze back. They had mistaken my strategy for surrender. They thought they had won. In reality, they had just willingly, blindly walked straight into my trap.
The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by their buoyant, self-congratulatory chatter. Before the news had even had a chance to settle, Chad, ever the pragmatist, launched into logistics. "The boys will love the backyard," he said, already mentally measuring the space for a brand new swing set. "And that guest room, the one you never use, it'll be perfect for my home office. The kitchen needs a bit of modernizing, of course. Maybe we can knock down that wall to open it up into the living room." They were carving me out of my own home before I'd even left the table. They spoke of it as a blank canvas, completely forgetting the artist who had lived and loved and grieved there for 40 years. I stood up and began clearing the plates, my back to them, listening to their cheerful, oblivious planning. Tessa was already talking about nursery wallpaper and color schemes for what was currently my sewing room, my private sanctuary. I rinsed the plates in the sink, my movements slow, deliberate, and controlled. I dried my hands on a clean dish towel, folded it neatly into a perfect square, and placed it on the counter. The game was afoot, and they had no idea they weren't the ones in control. They thought they were taking my house. They had no idea I was about to give it away. The moment Tessa and Chad's SUV disappeared down the street, the cheerful, accommodating mask I was wearing dissolved. I stood in the center of my quiet living room, the sickly sweet taste of lemon tart still coating my tongue, and felt the full, crushing weight of their betrayal settle upon me.
It wasn't just the house, the bricks and mortar. It was the complete and utter erasure of me, of my life, of my feelings. They had looked at my sanctuary, the place I had filled with love and memory, and seen only square footage and potential resale value. They had looked at me and seen not a person, but an inconvenience to be managed. But there was no time for grief. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Grief was passive. What I needed was action. What I needed was a plan, and I needed to set it in motion immediately. I walked over to my old roll-top desk, the one Harold had bought at a dusty flea market and lovingly restored with his own hands. In a leather-bound address book, now brittle with age, I found the name and number I was looking for. It belonged to Marisol Chang. Marisol had been one of my students nearly 15 years ago, back when I was still teaching senior English at Northwood High. She was a whip-smart, fiercely determined girl with eyes that missed nothing. She always sat in the front row, her questions sharp and insightful, challenging not just me, but the texts themselves. I saw a fire in her, a refusal to accept things at face value, that reminded me of myself at that age. I remember writing her college recommendation letter, pouring every ounce of my belief in her onto the page. She'd gotten a full scholarship to a prestigious university and had never looked back. We'd stayed in touch loosely over the years. She sent a Christmas card every year without fail, each one topped with a glossy photo of her growing family. The last one had her name printed in elegant gold script under a prominent local real estate logo. She was now one of the top agents in the entire county. I dialed the number before I could lose my nerve. My hand was shaking slightly, but my voice when I spoke was steady. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Marisol Chang speaking. It's Elaine Hargrave, your old English teacher. There was a half-second of stunned silence, then her voice bloomed with genuine warmth and recognition. Oh my goodness, Mrs. Hargrave, it's been forever! How are you? It's so good to hear from you. I'm running out of time, Marisol, and I need your help, I said, my voice low and urgent, skipping the politenesses. I laid out the situation in stark, simple terms. I need to sell my house, and I need to do it fast and quietly. No online listings, no sign in the yard. I need it sold and closed before my daughter shows up with a moving truck in 3 weeks. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pause of judgment or confusion, but of pure, rapid calculation. She was already working the problem, seeing the angles. A good lawyer would have asked a dozen questions about family disputes, potential divorce situations, or feuds over inheritance. Marisol, who I had once taught to read between the lines, understood immediately. Still, her professional caution kicked in. Mrs. Hargrave, she said, her voice gentle but firm, selling a house is a huge decision. Are you absolutely sure you're not acting in the heat of the moment? Perhaps we should talk to a family law attorney first, just to explore your options. Marisol, I said, my voice now as sharp and clear as a diamond, in your classroom, I taught you to analyze characters, to understand their motivations. My daughter's motivation is greed, and her method is manipulation. They have left me no other options. Now I need you, not as a former student, but as the best damn real estate agent in this town. I need your expertise and your discretion. Can you do this for me? The challenge in my voice, the appeal to her professional pride and our shared history worked. Her hesitation vanished, replaced by a fierce loyalty. I understand, Mrs. Hargrave, she said, her voice humming with efficiency. An off-market, private sale. It's not easy, but it's absolutely doable. I have a curated list of clients, investors, young families with pre-approved financing who are tired of the bidding wars, people who are looking for a real home, not just a property. Tell me what you need. I want a clean sale, I said, feeling a surge of strength, of power returning to me. Preferably all cash, no contingencies. And Marisol, I want it to go to someone who understands what it means to earn a home, not just be handed one. She had a couple in mind already, her voice now electric with purpose. Let me make some calls. I'll be in touch within 24 hours. And Mrs. Hargrave, don't worry.
I've got your back." Hanging up the phone, I felt the first real flicker of hope since I'd overheard that terrible whispered conversation in the dark. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had an ally, a smart, capable, and loyal ally who owed me a small debt of gratitude from the past and who was now in the perfect position to help me secure my future. The gears of my plan were beginning to turn.
The initial plan to use a repainting crew as a smokescreen was a good start, but as the days ticked by, I realized it was flimsy. It was a story full of holes, a thin veil that a determined and suspicious person could easily rip through. What if Chad, in a fit of project manager zeal, decided to drive by and saw no painting crew, no vans, no signs of work? What if Tessa, armed with a dozen paint swatches and a head full of decorating ideas, insisted on dropping by to consult with the crew? It was a plan that relied too heavily on their lack of curiosity, and I couldn't afford to take that risk. A woman my age, who had lived as long as I had, knew that the most convincing lies are always wrapped in a kernel of undeniable truth. I needed something more solid, something that would not only keep them away, but would also cleverly mask the true nature of the visitors Marisol would soon be bringing to my door. On Thursday morning, after a long, sleepless night spent devising a new strategy, I called Tessa. I pitched my voice to sound a little uncertain, a little frail, the version of me I knew she carried in her head, the one that was getting older and needed looking after. "Tessa, honey, it's Mom. I've been thinking, with all these changes, with you and the family moving in, it's made me realize I really need to get my financial affairs in order." "What do you mean, Mom? Is everything okay?" There was a sharp, immediate note of interest in her voice, the kind that always appeared like a shark fin in the water whenever the topic of my finances came up. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just, practical things. After your father's funeral, we never really updated the estate plan. It's been on my mind. I was talking to my friend Carol from my bridge club. You remember Carol. Her husband had that messy, awful legal battle with his siblings over their mother's inheritance, and she said it's always smart to have a current appraisal of one's major assets. So I've decided to look into a reverse mortgage." It was a stroke of genius, if I did say so myself. The term reverse mortgage was perfect. It sounded responsible, something a prudent retiree would do to ensure their financial security. It also implied a complex, bureaucratic financial process, justifying a stream of strangers coming to the house over the next few weeks. "A reverse mortgage?" Tessa repeated, the gears clearly turning in her head. I could almost hear her mental calculations. "Is that a good idea, Mom? Does that mean you'll have less equity to leave in the will?" "Oh, it's just an option I'm exploring," I said airily, as if it were a minor detail, "to have a little more liquid cash for my golden years and for travel and such. But the very first step, before anything else, is a full, independent appraisal of the house and property. So I'll have some people coming by over the next few weeks, appraisers, inspectors, that sort of thing. I just wanted to give you a heads up so you don't worry if you see an unfamiliar car in the driveway." I had just given myself the perfect cover. Every potential buyer Marisol would bring would now be a disguised appraiser. Every quiet tour of the house was now a property inspection. I was hiding my rebellion in plain sight, using the dry, boring language of responsible estate planning to mask my great escape. "Oh, okay, Mom. Well, that makes sense," she said, her tone a mixture of relief that I wasn't sick and a flicker of naked greed as she calculated how this might affect her future windfall. She probably thought a higher appraisal would only benefit them in the long run. "Just let us know if you need us to look over any of the paperwork. Chad is pretty good with numbers." "Of course, dear," I said sweetly, the lie tasting like honey. "You'll be the first to know."
The very next afternoon, Marisol called, her voice electric with excitement. She said, I have them, the Kellers, Landon and Priya. He's an architect, she's a graphic designer. They've been looking for months and they just lost another bidding war on a house they loved. They're expecting their first child in the fall and are desperate for a family home with character. They can offer all cash and close in 2 weeks. They want to see the house tomorrow at 2. On Thursday morning, at precisely 2 p.m., Landon and Priya Keller walked into my home under the guise of being property inspectors. They were everything Marisol had described. Young, bright, and with a gentle, respectful energy about them that was a world away from Chad and Tess's grasping entitlement. While they were admiring the built-in bookshelves in the living room, my heart nearly stopped. Through the front window, I saw it. Tessa's silver SUV pulling up to the curb. My blood turned to ice. She was here, unannounced. My carefully constructed plan was about to implode. I was just at the Target nearby and thought I'd drop off some of those paint swatches we talked about, she called out cheerily as she walked up the path, holding a handful of colored paper strips like a fan. For a terrifying second, I froze, my mind a blank wall of panic. But then, years of practice in managing unexpected family dramas, of thinking on my feet, took over. I took a deep, silent breath and forced a smile, intercepting her on the front porch before she could step inside. Tessa, what a surprise, I said, taking the swatches from her hand as if they were precious gifts. Honey, these are lovely. I want you to meet some people. This is Priya and her husband Landon. They're friends of Marisol Chang, the real estate agent I told you about. They're experts in home renovation, and they were kind enough to stop by and give me some advice on what improvements would add the most value for the appraisal. Isn't that lucky? It was a lie born of pure adrenaline, but it was plausible. Marisol's name gave it the ring of truth. Landon and Priya, bless their intuitive hearts, played along instantly without missing a beat. A pleasure to meet you, Landon said, stepping forward to shake Tessa's hand, his expression open and friendly. Your mother has a real gem of a house here, solid bones. Oh, well, yes, it's a great house, she said, looking them over with a proprietary air, as if she were the lady of the manor and they were the hired help. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Priya shot me a quick, almost imperceptible glance, her eyes full of sympathy and understanding. The close call had revealed the entire truth of my situation to them without me having to say a single word. Just then, Tessa's phone buzzed loudly in her purse. It was Chad. I have to take this, she said, turning away with an air of self-importance. Yes, honey. No, I'm at Mom's. Just dropping something off. Okay, I'm leaving now. She gave us all a quick, distracted wave and hurried back to her car. I watched her drive away, my legs feeling weak with relief, my heart still pounding in my chest. I turned back to Landon and Priya, who were looking at me with new eyes full of compassion. She seems eager, Priya said softly, her choice of words a masterpiece of understatement.
I just nodded, unable to speak. That evening, Marisol called with their official offer. Full price, all cash, no contingencies, close in 10 days. I accept, I said, my voice clear and strong. The near disaster had only solidified my resolve. I wasn't just selling a house anymore. I was choosing my successors, and I had found the perfect ones. Accepting the Kellers' offer was like turning a key in a lock that I didn't know I'd been trapped behind. It set the final, irreversible phase of my plan into motion. The next 10 days were a blur of quiet, purposeful activity, a strange dance of deception and liberation. By day, I was the picture of a placid retiree puttering around her home, occasionally waving to Florence next door. By night, I was a general, orchestrating a clandestine retreat, moving with a speed and efficiency that would have shocked my daughter. The packing was the hardest part, an archaeological dig through the layers of my own life. Every object I touched was saturated with memory.
40 years of a life lived within these walls had to be sorted, judged, and condensed into what could fit into the back of a rented Ford Transit van. I started in the attic, the hot, dusty repository of forgotten things. I found boxes of Tessa's old school projects, her childish drawings of our family, her report cards with my proud check marks in the margins. I found her prom dress, a confection of 90s-era satin sealed in a dusty garment bag. I found a collection of Harold's meticulously built model airplanes, their delicate balsa wood wings coated in a fine layer of dust. For a fleeting moment, the old habit of motherhood kicked in. I was tempted to call Tessa to ask her if she wanted any of it. "Don't you want to keep your prom dress for your own daughter someday?" The thought was automatic, ingrained. But then I remembered her voice in the night, coolly and calmly plotting to take my home. I remembered the dismissive way she'd referred to my dream trip as your garden thing. She hadn't earned the right to this nostalgia. These were my memories, not hers to claim or discard at her convenience. I took a thick black marker and wrote "Donate" on the side of the box in big, firm letters. It felt like a small act of defiance. I worked room by room, my movements methodical, almost robotic. The sewing room was a particular kind of heartbreak. This was my sanctuary, the one space that had been entirely and unequivocally mine after Harold was gone. I ran my hand over the worn wooden surface of the sewing table, remembering the comforting hum of the machine, the deep satisfaction of turning a flat, lifeless piece of fabric into something beautiful and useful. Tessa and Chad wanted to paint it coastal calm and fill it with a crib and a rocking chair, wiping away any trace of me, of my creativity. I packed my best Ginger scissors, my grandmother's collection of vintage buttons in their old tin box, and a few precious bolts of Liberty of London fabric I'd been saving. The rest, including the sturdy old sewing table itself, I posted on a local community forum under the heading, "Free to a Good Home." A young mother who was starting a small business making children's clothes from her apartment came to pick it up the next day. Her eyes lit up. "Perfect," she whispered, running her hand over the surface, just as I had. "I can't believe it." I knew it was going to a good home, a place where it would be used to create, not just take up space. Some things were harder to let go of. There was the quilt Harold had been working on when he got sick, a complex star pattern. The needle was still threaded in the last square he'd stitched, a silent testament to a life interrupted. I folded it carefully and placed it in a box labeled Keep. There was the photo album from the years when Tessa was small, her hair in pigtails, her smile missing 2 front teeth. She used to follow me around the garden, her small hands trying to mimic mine as I tended to the flowers. Where had that little girl gone? How had she become the cold, calculating woman I overheard in the dark? I put the album in the Keep box too. I wasn't erasing my entire past, just the parts that were being used as a weapon against me. Each night, after a long day of packing and sorting, I would sit at the kitchen table with a legal pad and make lists. Utilities to cancel, forwarding address to set up at a P.O. box in a nearby town, DMV notification, insurance. The lists gave me structure, a sense of control in the midst of the emotional chaos. They were my battle plan. Tessa called twice during that week, her calls like little daggers of irony. The first time, she was bubbling with excitement over a kitchen island she'd seen on Pinterest, a massive slab of reclaimed wood. "Wouldn't that be amazing in the new kitchen, Mom?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. The second time, it was to inform me that Chad thought they should convert the sewing room into the nursery right away after moving in. "Don't worry," she added brightly, as if bestowing a great favor. "We'll move all your sewing stuff into a corner of the garage or a storage unit or something." Each call was like a fresh twist of the knife, but it only strengthened my resolve. They weren't just moving into my house, they were moving into my life, rearranging it to suit them, relegating my passions and my history to a dusty corner in the garage.
On the final day before the closing, Marisol brought Landon and Priya by for their final walkthrough. The house was mostly empty now, the rooms echoing with a kind of sad, hollow emptiness. But the Kellers didn't see emptiness. They saw potential. They walked through the rooms, their voices soft with planning and dreams. They spoke of where their baby's crib would go, where they would put their Christmas tree, where they would hang the family photos they hadn't even taken yet. As they were about to leave, Priya turned to me, her eyes shining with sincere emotion. "Mrs. Hargrave, we just want you to know how much we love this house. It feels happy here. We promise we'll take good care of it. And the peonies, we'll keep them blooming for you." In that moment, I knew with absolute, bone-deep certainty that I had made the right choice. This wasn't just a transaction, it was a transfer of stewardship. I was passing the torch to a new generation, one that understood that a home is built not just with wood and nails, but with love, effort, and respect. They weren't inheriting a property, they were earning the right to build their own memories within these walls. The keys I would hand them tomorrow felt less like a loss and more like a profound and deeply satisfying gift.
The closing was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. at a sterile, impersonal title company in the next town over. I had packed the last of my essential boxes into the rented van the night before, parking it discreetly down the street at Florence's house, out of sight. My own car, a reliable 10-year-old Toyota, was in my garage, gassed up and ready for my personal exodus. My house of 40 years was now eerily empty, scrubbed clean from top to bottom, and profoundly silent. It held no trace of me, save for the memories infused in its very walls, memories only I could hear. I slept poorly that night, a nervous, electric energy thrumming through me. This was the point of no return. I woke before the sun, the sky outside my bedroom window a dark, velvety purple. I made one last cup of coffee in my empty kitchen, using a camp stove and a mug I'd kept out. I drank it standing by the window, watching the sky slowly lighten over the tops of the trees in my backyard. I took a deep breath, walked out the back door for the last time, and locked it behind me. I didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury I could no longer afford. The closing with the Kellers was smooth and blessedly impersonal. We sat in a sterile, windowless conference room that smelled of toner and anxiety. We signed a mountain of paperwork, my hands steady as I signed my name over and over again, each signature a small act of liberation. When it was done, I handed the keys to Priya. Landon shook my hand firmly, his eyes full of sincere gratitude. "Thank you, Eleanor. We won't let you down." Priya gave me a gentle, careful hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I wished them a lifetime of happiness in their new home and walked out into the bright morning sun feeling 100 pounds lighter. My original plan was to be 2 states away by the time Tessa and Chad arrived for their grand takeover the next morning. I had a motel reservation in a small town just over the state line. But as I drove away from the title company, a new idea, a final, perfect grace note to my symphony of rebellion, began to form in my mind. It was risky, but the potential for a truly satisfying conclusion was too tempting to resist. I pulled into a gas station, went to the back of the store, and bought a cheap burner phone. I activated it, then called Landon. "Landon, it's Eleanor Hargrave. I know this is a strange and rather bold request, but I need a small favor. I have a feeling some uninvited guests may be arriving at the house tomorrow morning around 9 a.m. under the very mistaken impression that they are moving in." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a low chuckle. "I think I understand," he said slowly. "They can be insistent," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "They are my daughter and her husband. They will not be expecting you. They will be expecting me. I would be eternally grateful if you were simply there, on the property, perhaps watering the peonies when they arrive.
You don't have to be confrontational. In fact, it's better if you're not. Just be the new owner. Consider it done, Eleanor, he said, a note of clear admiration in his voice. We were planning to go over early anyway, to take some measurements. We'll be there. Don't you worry about a thing. With that final piece of the puzzle in place, I tossed the burner phone into a trash can, got back in my car, and started driving south. As the miles unspooled behind me, I allowed myself to imagine the scene that would unfold the next morning. I had set the stage, positioned the actors, and now the curtain was about to rise on the final dramatic act. I pictured it vividly, playing it out in my mind like a movie. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on the dot, a big, clumsy U-Haul truck would rumble down my quiet cul-de-sac, its diesel engine disturbing the weekend peace. Chad would be behind the wheel, a triumphant, proprietary smirk on his face. Tessa would be in the passenger seat, probably already filming a before video on her phone for her social media followers, narrating their exciting new chapter. They would pull into the driveway. Chad would hop out, leaving the engine running, and march up to the porch like he owned the place, ready to take possession of his new kingdom. And what they would see would be Landon, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, calmly watering my peonies with my own green garden hose. The confusion would be the first stage. They would assume he was a gardener, a contractor I'd hired. Chad, puffed up with self-importance, would ask what he was doing here, where I was. And Landon, polite and unflappable, would turn off the water, wipe his hands on his jeans, and introduce himself. I'm Landon Keller. My wife and I are the new owners. Not the tenant, not the painter, the owner. The denial would come next. Tessa would laugh nervously, a high, brittle sound, saying there must be a mistake, a terrible miscommunication. Chad would demand to see a deed, proof, and Landon, ever prepared, would oblige. I could see him pulling the thick manila envelope from a drawer just inside the door, the notarized final document with his and Priya's names printed clearly in black ink. That's when the shock would curdle into horror. Tessa would go pale, her phone slipping from her fingers to clatter on the concrete porch. But Chad would yell. His voice, loud and indignant and full of impotent rage, would fill the quiet street, accusing Landon of fraud, of trickery, of taking advantage of an old woman. Curtains would twitch in the houses nearby. And then the final, perfect touch. My neighbor Florence, who never missed her 9:15 a.m. walk, would be coming up the sidewalk right about them with her small dog trotting ahead of her. She would slow down, her sharp eyes taking in the whole dramatic tableau. The U-Haul truck, Tessa gesturing wildly, Chad pacing and shouting, and Landon standing his ground, firm and calm, on the porch of his new home. She wouldn't say a word, just give a small, knowing shake of her head. She was old enough to know what it looked like when someone who had been pushed too far finally, decisively pushed back. The thought of that scene, of their arrogant entitlement crashing against the immovable, legal wall of reality, brought a grim, deep, and profoundly satisfying smile to my face as I crossed the state line into a new life. It was a victory I wouldn't witness, but it was a victory I could feel in my bones. By late Saturday afternoon, I was checked into a nondescript motel just over the Arizona border. The room was a symphony of beige and brown, smelling faintly of industrial-strength air freshener and years of transient lives. It was a world away from the home I had just left with its familiar sense of lemon polish and old books, but it was also a sanctuary. It was anonymous. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched or expected to be something for someone else. I unpacked my small suitcase, placing the framed photo of Harold on the dusty bedside table. His kind, smiling face was a comforting presence in the unfamiliar room.
My burner phone was gone, and my real phone had been silent all day. I had imagined a barrage of angry calls and texts, a digital siege. But there was nothing. The silence was more unsettling than an attack. It meant they were regrouping, processing, trying to understand the scale of their epic defeat. It meant they were probably trying to find a lawyer. The attack, when it finally came, wasn't a phone call. It was an email. Late that night, as I was about to turn off the light, my personal laptop, which I had connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, pinged with a new notification. The email was from Tessa, sent from her work address, a clear sign she couldn't access her personal accounts or that she wanted the message to have a more official, serious weight. The subject line was a single, stark word, typed in all caps. How? I opened it, my heart beating a little faster, a drumbeat of anticipation. It was a long, rambling tirade, a digital torrent of rage, disbelief, and breathtakingly wounded entitlement. Mom, how could you do this? How could you do this to your own family? To your own grandchildren? We drove up to the house this morning with a moving truck, with the boys in the back seat, ready to start our new life, the life you agreed to, and there was a strange man on the porch, a stranger in our house. He said he sold it to him. This has to be some kind of sick, twisted joke. Chad thinks you're having some kind of mental breakdown, that this man and his pregnant wife are squatters or professional con artists. We called the police. The police, Mom! They looked at the paperwork and it seems real. But how? Why wouldn't you tell us? Why would you lie to us? We are your family. We were going to take care of you. We had plans. Plans for the nursery, for family dinners, for the boys to grow up in the house their grandfather built with his own hands. You have destroyed everything. You have stolen that future from them. You have stolen that from us. You have been selfish and cruel, and I don't understand how the mother I knew could do something so hateful and vindictive. What are we supposed to do now? We gave notice on our rental. We have to be out in 2 weeks. We have nowhere to go. You have made us homeless, Mom, all because you couldn't bear to share what you have. You have broken my heart. You have broken this family beyond repair. But the silence, after so many years of being attuned to the needs of others, was a powerful, living thing. In the quiet moments, in the space between turning the pages of a book or waiting for the kettle to boil, the echoes of my old life would sometimes return. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box, the one marked keepsakes, I came across the photo album from Tessa's childhood. I sat on the cool tile floor of my new living room and turned the crackling, yellowed pages. There she was at age 5, beaming with a gap-toothed grin, her face smeared with chocolate as she held up a misshapen clay pot she'd made for me for Mother's Day. There she was at 10, looking serious and proud in her oversized soccer uniform, her knees scraped and muddy. There she was at 16, beautiful and awkward and radiant in her prom dress, standing next to a nervous-looking boy with a bad haircut. My heart ached with a sudden, sharp pang of grief. It was a grief for the daughter I remembered, the bright, funny, loving girl who had loved me without calculation, and for the mother I had been, the one who had believed that love was a shield strong enough to overcome anything. Was I too harsh? The question surfaced, unbidden, a serpent in my new Eden. Did I have to be so final? So absolute? Could there have been another way? A conversation, a family counseling session, a mediation with a lawyer to discuss issues of potential custody of my own life. Maybe if I had pushed back sooner, set boundaries years ago, it never would have come to this. Maybe her selfishness was a weed that had grown unchecked in the overly fertile soil of my own relentless giving. The doubt was a cold stone in my stomach. I had been so sure, so resolute in my anger and my righteousness. But now, in the quiet of my new life, the messy, painful complexities of love and family washed over me. I had won the war, but the victory felt strangely hollow. I had my freedom, but I had lost my daughter. I closed the photo album and put it on a bookshelf in the living room. I wouldn't hide it away. It was part of my story, a painful chapter, but a chapter nonetheless. But I couldn't dwell on it either. To heal, I knew I needed to look forward, to plant something new. That evening, I stepped out into the small patch of yard behind my rental. The soil was dry and sandy, a world away from the rich, dark clay I had spent years cultivating back home. It was a challenge, a new problem to solve. I went to a local nursery, a charming place with colorful, hand-painted signs, and bought a few hardy herbs, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for peace, and sage for wisdom, along with a bag of rich garden soil. I spent the next hour on my knees, not unlike how I had started with the peonies so long ago, my hands plunged into the new earth. I dug, I mixed, I prepared a place for new life. The physical work was grounding. The scent of the dry dirt and the fragrant herbs cleared my head. With each small plant I settled into the ground, I felt like I was planting a piece of myself here, putting down new, tentative roots in this unfamiliar land. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the yard, I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands onto my jeans, and looked at my small new garden. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was mine. A wave of peace, profound and quiet and deep, washed over me, chasing away the last of the doubt. I hadn't been too harsh. I had been a survivor. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had saved myself from being devoured by it. The choices I had made were not born of hate, but a desperate, long overdue act of self-preservation. Some relationships, I realized with a sad clarity, become like a house with a rotten foundation. You can try to patch it and prop it up for years. You can repaint the walls and pretend the cracks aren't there. But eventually, you have to accept that the only way to be safe is to walk away and build something new on solid ground.
My new life wouldn't be free of sadness or memory. The ghost of the daughter I had lost, the little girl in the photo album, would always be with me. But for the first time, I felt that the future was not just a continuation of the past, but something I could build from scratch, just like this little garden, one hopeful, fragrant plant at a time. A month after I arrived in Santa Fe, a sense of order, a new and unfamiliar rhythm, began to settle into my world. My little adobe house, which had at first felt like a temporary shelter, had started to feel like a genuine home. I had a routine: morning walks in the cool, crisp desert air, afternoons spent reading in the shade of my small porch or tending to my fledgling garden, and evenings trying out new recipes with the vibrant local ingredients I'd find at the market. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for years, a hum of tension beneath the surface of every day, had finally faded. It was replaced by a quiet contentment that felt strange and wonderful. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of papers I'd brought with me, I came across the folder containing my old will. It was a simple, straightforward document Harold and I had drawn up with a local lawyer years ago, leaving everything, the house, our savings, his modest 401k, to Tessa, our only child. Looking at her name typed neatly on the document, I felt a strange and profound detachment. It was like looking at the name of a character in a book I had read a long time ago. That life, that plan, that version of the future belonged to a different woman, a different reality. My first thought was to throw it in the fireplace. Burning the old well would have been dramatic, a satisfyingly cinematic gesture. But a fire only consumes. It doesn't create. I didn't just want to end my old story, I wanted to write a new one. I wanted to redefine my legacy, to transform it from a simple transfer of assets into a statement of my values. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. That fire had burned out. This was about purpose. I did some research and found a reputable estate planning lawyer in Santa Fe, a woman named Miss Dela Cruz, with kind, intelligent eyes and a nonsense attitude that I immediately respected. In her quiet, sunlit office, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas, I laid out my wishes. I want to create a new will and a living trust, I explained, my voice steady. My daughter, Tessa Hargrave, is not to be a direct beneficiary or the executor of my estate. Miss Dela Cruz simply nodded, her expression unreadable as she took notes on a yellow legal pad. There was no judgment, only professional focus. "And you have grandchildren?" she asked. "Yes, 2 boys, Liam and Josh," I said. "My grandchildren are another matter entirely. I love them, and I will not allow my life savings to be squandered or absorbed into their parents' debt and poor decisions."
Together, over the course of 2 meetings, we structured a careful, ironclad plan. A significant portion of my estate, the proceeds from the sale of the house and my own investments, would be placed into a tightly controlled trust for Liam and Josh. The trust would be managed by a neutral third-party financial institution, not a family member, to prevent any possibility of manipulation or coercion. The funds could be used for their health expenses and their education, college, trade school, whatever path they chose. But they could not access the principal until they each turned 30 years old, and even then, there was a crucial condition. "I want to stipulate," I told Miss Dela Cruz, my conviction growing stronger with every word, "that before receiving their share of the inheritance, they must each complete a certified course in personal financial management. I want to give them the tools for independence, not just a check. I want to give them a skill their parents never bothered to learn." It was the best I could do for them. It was a gift of security, tempered with a lesson in responsibility. It was love, expressed not through blind indulgence, but through prudent planning. But there was more. After setting aside the substantial trust for the boys, there was still a significant amount left over. What about the remainder of the estate? Mistilla Cruz asked, her pen poised over the legal pad. A new idea, born from my conversation with Marisol and my years as a teacher who believed in the power of potential, had taken root in my mind. I want to establish a scholarship fund, I said, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across my face. I want to call it the Hargrave Chang Opportunity Scholarship. I named it after myself, after Harold, whose hard work had built the foundation of our security, and after the bright, determined young student who had been my loyal ally when I needed one most. The scholarship would be administered by my old high school. It would be awarded each year to a graduating senior who, like Marisol, demonstrated immense potential and a powerful work ethic, but faced significant financial hardship. It was a way to turn my personal pain into a public good, to ensure that my life's work would no longer culminate in simply being absorbed by my daughter's greed. It would now be a force for positive change in the world. Leaving the lawyer's office that day, clutching the folder containing my new estate plan, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of peace. I had reclaimed my assets, yes, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my narrative. My life's work would no longer culminate in simply being absorbed by my daughter's greed. It would now be a force for positive change in the world. That evening, I sat on my small patio, a copy of my new notarized will resting on the table beside me. The desert air was warm and still, the silence whole and complete. I thought about Tessa and Chad. I didn't know what had become of them, and I found, to my surprise, that I didn't care to know. Their chapter in my book was closed. I hoped, for the sake of my grandsons, that they would find their way. But their path was no longer my burden to carry or my mess to clean up. My story was no longer about what had been done to me. It was about what I had chosen to do next. It was about the quiet, unshakable power of drawing a line in the sand and deciding to build a new, beautiful garden on the other side. The peonies back on my old street were probably in full bloom now, being tended by a new family. I hoped they were beautiful. But here in the desert, my own small patch of sage and rosemary was growing, and for the first time in a long, long time, so was I. My name is Eleanor Hargrave, and I am finally home. And to those of you who have listened to my story, thank you. I know many of you have faced your own battles, your own moments where you felt your kindness was mistaken for weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most resolute plan. Do you agree? Share your thoughts, or even just a heart in the comments if this resonated with you. It helps to know we're not alone.